Finance, long-term investing that actually works with Jesse Cramer this week on the Extreme Personal Finance Show. All right, today I'm joined by Jesse Cramer. He's the mind behind the Best Interest blog and the host of the Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors podcast. He's also a regular contributor on the Stacking Benjamins show. He helps families build simple, behavior-proof financial retirement plans at Cobblestone Capital Advisors. And if you like clear thinking, low-drama investing, right? Straight talk about money, Jesse's your guy. Welcome to the show, Jesse. How's it going, man?
Chris, thanks so much. I really like that intro. I might have to steal some of that intro language for my own use, but no, I really like the way you described my work, and it's just fun to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Awesome. Absolutely. And I know our paths have crossed over the last few years. And then we've been on a couple podcasts, and I met you for the first time in person just recently at FinCon. That was pretty cool. You're a lot taller in person than you are on online.
That seems to be a common refrain I hear. Yeah. I'm 6'2". If I'm wearing big sneakers or shoes, maybe I'm 6'3". But I had a blast in Portland. We were talking offline. It sounded like you had a great time too, and just met a bunch of new people and new creators in the space, new podcasters or writers, and then got to reconnect with people who I've met before. Or, I mean, one of the coolest ones is like you and I had met virtually. We had done things like this before, recording and, see face to face, hear one another's jokes. But then to actually kind of flip over to the real side and meet someone in real life is always a fun way to kind of close that loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's the thing too. It's like kind of the recurring theme about the value of in-person meetings. I host a monthly meetup where a bunch of us money nerds get together each month and talk about financial topics or whatever. And what I've learned, people can listen to podcasts, they can read books, and a lot of people are smart and they can kind of get the mechanics behind personal finance. But once you meet in person and have those real discussions or talk with other people that have been doing it, there's just so much value there.
Yeah. So, I was just listening to, I think it was an episode of Choose FI that mentioned that same, one of the guests mentioned that, I think it's like the Camp FI events and then the economy event, just how much value there is in meeting people who are either ahead of you on the path or maybe behind you on the path, and hearing from real successes and real struggles on the path too. Cause I think, the numbers are one thing, and you and I both know that, we can all kind of learn the numbers eventually, or maybe just become familiar and comfortable with the numbers. And the psychology part tends to be the place where most people end up tripping up, or at least most of our listeners end up tripping up. The numbers are okay, but the psychology, it remains a struggle.
Exactly. Well, I want to start, because one thing that I'm really curious about. So I wanted to ask you. You worked for years as like an aerospace engineer. It says on your LinkedIn, and again, I've heard you talk about it in the past. So this aerospace mechanical engineer, and now you've kind of moved from working with these like space telescopes and stuff into portfolio building and helping people with their finances. What was that shift like, and why did you choose to make that dramatic shift? Or maybe it's more similar than I think. I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's a couple similarities, but it was, it's a pretty big shift and a scary shift at the time. But you're right. My background, I have 2 degrees in mechanical engineering. And while I was in grad school, one of my mechanical engineering classes was called optomechanics, which is kind of like the way of thinking of it is both the mechanical design of lenses, like ways of focusing light, and then especially the way you kind of hold those lenses in place. So if you think of a telescope as an example, and you're trying to focus light in a very, very precise way to take these amazing pictures from far away, the manner in which you hold those lenses, the structure around the lenses becomes really important. So that's what optomechanics was all about. And I really enjoyed the class, had a really good professor, and he was one of the most respected former employees of one of the largest telescope manufacturers in the country. What used to be part of Kodak here in Rochester, New York. Kodak made cameras, and part of Kodak also made really cool telescope technology. So I went and worked at that company for 7 years. And while I was there doing telescope design and which is, a whole whole other ball of wax. Really cool. But that's where I developed my personal interest in personal finance, because I was making a decent income as a aerospace engineer, had no idea what I ought to be doing with it. My dad gave me a couple helpful pointers about, getting that 401k match. But then my go-to story, because I think it's so true, is we all hit a certain point where we see maybe it's 5,000 or 10,000 or $30,000 in our 401k. It's a lot more money than maybe we expected to see in there. And we say like, whoa, I've got some skin in the game. I better learn what this is all about. So that was mine. And in 2018, actually, that was probably more like 2016 when that happened. And I became a nerd for Mr. Money Mustache and John Bogle and all the books and all the blogs and, that kind of thing. And eventually became a little bit of an expert at my engineering firm. So, other younger employees especially would come to me and just ask
Sure.
questions. So that's how the blog was born. My blog was born, was taking these email communications with my colleagues, I was writing to them anyway, and just taking that email, turn it into a blog post. And then a couple years later, I think maybe I just enjoyed the idea of speaking sometimes more than writing, or I liked both. And I figured if I'm writing these articles, let me see if I can port them over and turn them into podcast episodes. And the podcast kind of meandered for a while. Even at one point, I stopped recording for like a year. But then
Wow.
eventually I recommitted to it and quickly found my groove. And now at this point, the podcast is more of a serious project actually than the blog is.
Right on. Right on. Do you feel as though, are there any specific engineering principles that you had that helps you with your client work today? Right? Like,
Yeah.
working with tolerances or feedback loops or failure, like if things fail, how to adjust. I know a lot of times, I retired from tech, and I was a enterprise systems engineer, and my
Mm-hmm.
role was just to combine all of these things and to solve technical problems. And I think sometimes they can help. And I'm just curious on what you found there.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And you reminded me, Chris, I kind of didn't quite finish the story, and I
Oh
should
yeah.
have, because you originally posed, how did I end up sitting in the chair I'm ending in right now? So, right. Eventually, I realized I enjoyed working with my listeners and my readers more than I enjoyed being a 9 to 5 engineer.
Okay.
So I started looking around to see, what could I do where I could actually work with people and help them with their finances. And I got connected with a great local firm here in Rochester. And so it's now been 4 full years that I've been working here and helping clients put plans together, helping families, mainly focused on individuals and families, a lot of retirement questions. That tends to be the proximate event that most people in their life will say, you know what, this is getting a little complex for me. Let me reach out to a professional. But it's just been great. And yeah, as far as the parallels to engineering, the couple that come to mind, and if you hit on something right there from the systems engineering point of view, is I really love this puzzle pieces metaphor to financial
Mhm.
planning. Like putting together a financial plan is kind of like putting together a puzzle. And part one is simply finding all the pieces. Because I would wager that the average American, for example, might not even be aware of all the pieces in their life. They have some old IRA they forgot about.
Sure.
They have some old insurance policy they bought 10 years ago. They've been paying the premium every month, but it's kind of not on their mind anymore. Like it's those kind of things. Like let's get all the pieces on the table. In the fire community, well, how do we account for Social Security if you're going to retire at 45 and you might not collect for 17 years? And what's the status of Social Security then? Blah, blah, blah. So step one is just identifying all the puzzle pieces. And then step two is optimizing the way in which they fit together. And that has a direct parallel to engineering. Step one is figure out all the different parts and components and specs and requirements of this project. But then part two is optimize the way in which you design and build, the schedule, the cost, etc.
Sure.
So there's something there. And then another interesting thing on the topic, you mentioned tolerances and that kind of thing. So I think of margins of safety, factors of safety.
Mm.
I think there was an article I wrote maybe a year and a half ago that got some nice traction in the FI community. And it was all about how the typical DIY retiree, or if not typical, then at least too many DIY retirees that I see, will layer upon layer of factors of safety. Like every little way in which they could make a conservative assumption in their planning, they do make that conservative assumption. And those conservative assumptions, they usually multiply together. They like compound, for lack of a better term. And so the final product, their final retirement plan, if you will, ends up being so much more conservative than it
So they're,
needs to
they're
be.
over conservative.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It's like, well, I know that historically a 60-40 portfolio returns 8.5% per year. I'm going to assume it's 6% just to be safe.
Mm,
I know historically inflation is 3% a year. I'm going to assume it's 5% a year just to be safe. Based on current tax rates, my retirement uh, um, effective tax rate might be 12%. I'm going to assume it's 20. And like all the way down the line, they're leaning conservative. And next thing you know, this person who, if they were being realistic with themselves, maybe they could retire at 53. But because they've been so conservative, their actual numbers say you can't retire until 65. That's a
right.
12-year difference.
Sure.
And it's not that a little
Hmm.
conservatism can be fine, but I've seen situations where someone is just way too conservative, and you just end up. It's in engineering. If I did that on a telescope, I would end up with a payload that's twice as heavy as is permissible to launch. And you need to find a way to say, listen, you need some factors of safety, but you can't be so conservative that you no longer have a usable end product.
Wow. Yeah, I suppose there are those people. I mean, I've kind of heard stories too. Like if I go to like a campfire event or
Mm-hmm.
economy, and you're talking to some of those, I guess people that are really into personal finance, financial independence. They want to retire early, and they've been very frugal. They've been very conservative for so long. It's hard for them to now start saying, "Okay, I could retire at 53 or 55." Because they're so conservative, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's such a common refrain. I mean, it kind of it's. I'm not sure there's an engineering parallel, but the idea of like how do you go from a lifelong frugal saver into someone who now says they are going to spend down their assets for the next 40 years?
Right.
Like that pivot is not something that I don't think anyone could do that overnight. Um, it seems to be something that affects a lot of retirees, whether they're in the fire community or
Mm.
not. I see that story a lot.
Well, so this actually just happened to me this morning. I'm just going to share a little bit of little story with you. So there's this group of financial independence people. Do you know Amberly Grant? Do you know Amberly?
I know who she is. Yeah.
Yeah. So her group, FinTalks, they're doing a cruise next year in May, and so I'm going on this FinTalks cruise. First time ever going with a group to Alaska, and so I was determining my excursions. And so the thing is, it's like I was trying to determine, well, which fishing excursion I wanted to do, right? The salmon sport fishing thing or fishing for halibut or whatever. And I was asking like my uncle and a couple friends, I'm like, hey, which one would you do? And my uncle, first thing he says, well, man, it's going to cost you so much to ship that fish back home. Dude, I'm already paying for the cruise. I'm already paying $400 for the day excursion. I'll pay to ship the fish back home. Like, and so again, old me would have been totally that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Like super conservative. How can I save? I'd be comparing well, it's $100 less to do this excursion than that excursion. You know what I mean? And so it's taken me a good, well, almost 2 years now to realize I can spend a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Totally. And I mean, it's like there are other parallels to this in life. And one that comes to mind is like you'll hear some stories of these athletes who are like uber competitive and hate
Mhm.
to lose. And they just have this drive to win, this drive to train. And then maybe at some point, whether it's during their career or after their career, they'll come back and be like, yeah, I was a real prick. Like I hated to lose. I hated my opponents for trying to beat me. I was a real prick. And it's tough because the thing that made them elite in the first place is also this thing that, okay, maybe made their lives harder on an interpersonal level in that example. And there's something similar here where it's like the thing that makes people successful down the FI path in the first place, the thing that gets people to early retirement, or just the thing that gets them to a comfortable retirement,
Mhm.
can also be the thing that kind of hinders them once they're in retirement a little bit. So it's just kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's not like you can just flip a switch, but the practice and I've heard that story is a really good one. I know Mindy and Carl Jensen have a story that
Mhm.
I'd heard them maybe when they were with Ramit Sethi. They told a story about like paying for a helicopter tour, something they never would have considered doing
Right.
before, but now they're practicing, they're flexing those spending muscles. And so whether it's shipping this fish for a couple $100 or
Yeah.
a multi-$1,000 helicopter tour or whatever it is, but I think we all
Yeah.
need to think about how we're going to exercise those spending muscles once the time comes.
Sure. And leading up to that, so again, so my listeners, leading up to that, I like how you are often, at least from what I gather and I listen to, you're often more of a champion to kind of that boring portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
right? More of like diversified index funds, right? Because I mean, your show is called the long term. What's it called? The long
Yeah.
term investing, right?
Personal finance for long-term investors.
That's
That's
right.
it.
That's right. What do you feel as though kind of is that common behavior that blows up that simple plan?
Yeah. I mean, specifically on the investing side, uh, and especially here, we're recording this end of September 2025.
Hmm.
And one could argue that we've basically had 15 going on 16 years of amazing stock market returns with two significant bumps along the way, maybe three. And again, so going back to the trough was in March of 2009. That's when the great financial crisis hit its low, was March of 2009. And ever since then, we've been on this amazing bull run, except for perhaps COVID itself was quite a shock and a scare, that
Hmm.
March of 2020.
Yep.
But then the recovery was something like four or 5 months later. We were back above that trough. Okay. And then 2022, excuse me, 2022 was an interesting time and kind of a lost year, both for stocks and decades. But okay, we've recovered from that since then. And then the maybe is maybe you could throw in the tariff tantrum here in April of 2025 as another blip. Again, from February down to the bottom, I think was a 19% drop. We have more than recovered from that as we sit here in
Hmm.
September. But okay, so maybe those are the three blips. But other than that, wow, it's been a wonderful time to be a stock market investor. And the behavioral concern that I have for my audience, for my clients, for your listeners too, is this will not last.
Hmm.
It cannot last. There will be a time, and I don't know when it is. I don't think any of us do. I don't know if it's next month. I don't know if it's next year. I don't know if it's 27, 2028, or beyond. But there will come a time when we will have some prolonged bear market. We will have, I think, the dot-com bubble bursting was a 40% drop over the course of 2.5 years or something like that, right? The great
Sure.
financial crisis was a 50% drop that peak to trough occurred over 2 years or something like
Do you
that.
think the next one will be that vast? Do you think it'll be that big? You think?
I genuinely don't know, but it
Right.
could be. It,
Yeah.
it could be, right? And I think, the parallel is like, every time I drive through a green light, I try to look left and right, even though I have the green light, because I don't want to get T-boned. And the
Dude,
question
right?
is, well, if you get T-boned,
Hmm.
are you going to be able to extricate yourself from the car and walk away and be like, that was scary, but I'm fine? Or are you going to break both your legs and get mercy flighted to the hospital? I don't
Wow.
know. I'd rather
Right.
not get T-boned in the first place. And then maybe that's a wrong example because, knock on wood, I never get T-boned. I think there will be a market crash eventually. I think there has to be, or just
Hmm.
a bear market. Maybe it's not a crash, but some sort of bear market. And my concern is that a lot of investors, especially newer investors, especially maybe people who discovered FI 9 years ago, and they've
Hmm.
kind of seen this magic, they've been on this magic carpet ride.
Right.
I don't want them to be totally knocked off the investing train by this potential 12, 18, 24-month period, maybe even a little longer, where their accounts are down. They keep on going down. All the news is pessimistic. Almost assuredly, there's something bad going on in the real world that coincides with the market dropping. It's not like the world will be great, but the market has dropped 30%. Usually there's, and that's the reason why bear markets can be so scary. It's not just that my account is down, it's that the narrative sounds really bad too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just a fun, well, I find it fun, but something that I try to focus a good amount of my content on is steeling ourselves, right? Bracing ourselves for that fact that it'll happen. And we should be aware of it. We should try to go into it with eyes wide open and say, yep, we knew this would happen and we are going to stick to our guns. We are going to stay the course. We're going to
Right.
hold. But that's easier said than done.
Right on. So, I mean, you think that again, ways that others may blow up that plan, it's that knee jerk reaction that if there comes some sort of bear market, they start to panic sell and that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, granted, the people who I heard from this past April during the tariff tantrum,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm
Tariff
not sure.
tantrum. I like that.
Right, you like that word? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not a bad name for like a heavy metal song, I
that's
think, you
right.
know? But I think some of the people I heard from, granted, maybe they weren't your dyed in the wool bogleheads or dyed in the wool FI people, but I did get some questions about like, hey, US stocks are down 19% on the year. International stocks are actually up a little bit on the year. Should I just sell my international, or should I sell
Mm,
my domestic stocks for now and just go 100% international? Like, whoa,
wow.
that question in and of itself kind
Wow.
of, right, there's
Yeah.
like a yellow flag built into
Yep.
that question. And it's those kind of things where it's like, well, you know, if a 19% peak to trough and a 2 week period of kind of bad headlines, or maybe a 1 month period of bad headlines, if that creates this uncertainty in your mind, now imagine the peak to trough is twice as much, if not more. And now imagine the bad headlines last not for a month or two,
Right.
but for 12 or 18 or 24. Um, and I think that's potentially something that could happen. I will say a devil's advocate argument, not that you asked for it, Chris, but some people
Sure.
say that because there is just so much more information now than there was even 15 years ago, and it proliferates so quickly around the
Mm,
internet that both the crashes and recoveries are happening faster. That, you know,
interesting.
the
Yeah,
tariff
I can see that.
tantrum, if the tariff tantrum happened 20 years ago, it might have been a 6 or 12 month decline and then a 6 or 12 month recovery. Well, now it's a 6 week decline and a 6 week recovery. Maybe that might be true. We'll kind of see how it goes, but I still think it's worth considering that multi-year drawdowns can happen, and as long-term investors, we need to stay the course.
Right. Yeah. It's so again, you help your clients be prepared that
Yeah,
this will, may, or could happen, and just to stay the course for sure.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think, and I mean, happy to dive into a little, maybe some of my not contrarian, but perhaps contrarian compared to the FI movement. I know I was on Choose FI a few months ago, and I got some pushback for some of my opinions when it comes to portfolio design. But it's just my opinion, and I think any listener out there, it's like
Hmm.
get a bunch of opinions, listen to what a bunch of people have to say. Hopefully, they're people who you respect and seem to know what they're talking about, and then you can formulate your own decision based on these kind of group of opinions. I think that's an awesome way to DIY your finances.
Absolutely. I love that. And if you kind of look at, if you're working with families and you're doing more of a holistic planning, right? You're
Yeah,
looking at things
yeah,
like estate planning, insurances, Roth timing. Like if you're working with a family, what is some of the, I guess, high ROI, low effort, like some of the, I don't want to say quick things, but
yeah.
the things that you would help them do first.
Totally. And this, I know exactly what I'm going to answer this question with, and it might cause a couple people out there to roll their eyes,
That's
but
right.
I promise you guys, if you're listening to this, if you get this thing right,
Hmm.
you are, think of the way you build a building. Like you need to start with a foundation. With a bad foundation, nothing else matters because eventually it'll all come tumbling down. And this one thing really is the foundation of any financial plan. It is measuring and having really good, accurate data on how much money comes into your household and how much money goes out. It's cash flow measurement, or if you want to call it budgeting or tracking, it's all the same thing. It's
Hmm.
measuring dollars coming in, measuring dollars going out. And it's not rocket science. It's not telescope design. I used to do it. It's not that hard.
I
And
love
yet,
it. I love it.
you know, just the number of times where, you know, I'll be working with someone, say they're on the verge of retirement. They've done an awesome job. They've got 7 figures in their retirement accounts. They knew that to start putting some Roth dollars away and some taxable dollars away. They come to me with some knowledge and some ideas. They've clearly done a lot of things right. But then when we say like, okay, the foundation of retirement planning is, well, how much do you spend, right? How much are you currently earning and how much of that do you spend? And they'll look at me and say like, we don't really know. I mean, we know how much we've earned, and I guess we can back our way into it by seeing how much we've saved over time. And it's true. Like you can, after the fact, always go back and try to understand how much someone is spending.
Mm-hmm.
But without that knowledge, I mean, just think about the 4% rule. If we want to look at that one specifically, it's a fraction.
Mm-hmm.
And one half of that fraction is how much are you spending?
Right.
And if you don't have that answer, you can't use the 4% rule or any other safe withdrawal rate. And so whether it's interacting with readers or listeners or interacting with clients, there are, I think people might be surprised at how many of our fellow folks out there really still don't have a good idea of how much they're spending. And it's a foundational number in your life that cannot be avoided, at least not forever. And so I'd encourage anyone out there to really hone in on that.
Right. Really understand. I think that was one of the very first things that I did when I first discovered this. Those of you that are new, I didn't really know anything about personal finance until I was in my late 30s. And the first thing I did was really track where the money was going, because I had no idea where the money was going, whether that was eating out every lunch,
Yeah.
I mean, it was adding up to hundreds of dollars a month. I mean, stuff like that, to utilities and subscriptions that I had no idea like what I was paying or where the money was going. So that was really important for me.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Chris, I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, what technique or what tools do you use to track? Like, do you budget ahead? Do you track after the fact? Do you use an Excel spreadsheet? What does that look like?
Yeah. So early on, it was literally paper and pencil. I was just writing it down because it was totally new. Then I moved to like spreadsheets. Then Mint was a thing. So then I started using Mint, and I was a hardcore Mint user. And I will be honest, ever since Mint shut down, I kind of haven't really looked at it. I mean, I use Empower as my main dashboard for all of my stuff. It has some rudimentary budgeting tools. It'll auto, categorize some stuff. But in all seriousness, the last couple of years, I really haven't tracked. It was very important for the first, 6-7 years that I was like getting, paying off my debt, working towards, retiring early. But now that I'm not saying that you don't have to, but I really haven't since Mint. I was diehard Mint user, but when it went away, I just never tried anything else really.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's a relatively common set of like a series of events. I feel like is that most people, at least people in our positions where it's just like, we are kind of nerds for this stuff and we really want to get into the weeds. We like it so much. We're talking on a podcast about it.
Yeah.
We use some sort of tool at some point in our life just to measure every single detail. And then eventually you get to a point where it's either like you stop measuring altogether, or just in a very light way, which is like, I don't know, you're using Empower. So at the very least, you're probably tracking bank account balances and investment account balances. And so just tracking your bank account balance is a way for you to say like, okay, the number is staying the same or slowly going up, or at least it's not rapidly going down. And therefore, you're spending within your kind of mental limits. And even that, I totally encourage people to do that. I think the simplest way to start doing it, if you've never done anything before, is literally just to look at your bank account balances at the end of every month and see, is that number going up or is that number going down? And if it does go down, then you can dive into some detail and say, boy, what exactly did I spend last month to cause this number to go down so much?
Yeah. And it may take you, 3 months, 6 months. There are some of those expenses that aren't monthly. So you kind of want to get that included in there. I know when I had the idea that I was going to like retire early, and I was using a spreadsheet, and I had basically my what I called my retirement expenses, and I literally had the spreadsheet with so many categories and like nested. It was like I just went super nerdy, but I was like capturing every single thing over time, and I did that literally for an entire year, like the entire 2022 and 2023. I did that to know how much I was paying for every utility. My garbage bill, my heating bill, my, water bill, because that my water bill was every 3 months, my garbage bill was every 3 months. I mean, stuff like that. And to really narrow down, this is what I need to live on in retirement. And I included everything from, gas for my truck to putting away maintenance for my truck. I'm going to get an oil
Mhm.
change, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah,
Because a lot of times that stuff is kind of forgotten because you don't get an oil change all the time,
totally.
you know.
Totally.
So that's just a little bit of, I guess, if I could offer my little 2 cents, it definitely takes over time to get all those expenses in there.
100%. I mean, Christmas is coming, whether we
Yeah,
like it or not. Christmas is
right.
coming every single year. And if you've got kids, or even if you don't have kids and you enjoy gifting to people, like there's likely a multi-hundred, if not multi-thousand-dollar expense between the beginning of November and the end of December. That, right, if you just decide to look at your June expenses and that becomes
Yeah,
your monthly budget, well, guess what? You should probably take the $1,500 in Christmas expenses and divide it by 12 and add that to the monthly line item. I know for us, life insurance, right? Term life insurance, but life insurance is, rather than do it monthly and kind of add a little bit of an interest rate, I pay one big annual bill, and it's in August. It's a
mm,
pretty big bill. And just like you said, you ought to amortize it over 12 months to truly get an accurate understanding of your monthly expenses.
sure. I know. Yeah, I had even. I mean, it's those things like as far as like gifts. In mine, I had concert tickets
Yeah,
and
there you go.
and Apple Music. So,
Yeah,
you need to add those things. Oh,
totally,
that's
totally.
awesome. That's awesome. Um, One thing that I'm curious about. So, how long have you been blogging now at Best Interest?
December will be 7 years. The blog's about 7, and the podcast is about 5. Although I did have that 1 year off in there.
Right on. So, in your podcasting and your blogging, what are some of the things that you've learned about teaching, educating people that you're like, oh, you kind of had to shift the way you did things, or I
Mhm.
guess what you've learned over those 7 years and 5 years. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is a little bit like nerdy and inside baseball.
Yeah.
But so like some quick examples, and this again, this is a super nerdy one, but um, when it comes to writing, when it comes to people reading blog stuff, reading written text on a page,
Hmm.
um, I could write the same exact blog post, and in the first version of it, it's got 3 long paragraphs, and then in the second version of it, I take each of those long paragraphs, basically turn every single sentence into its own paragraph. So now it just looks like 15 staccato lines in a
Hmm.
row. And that second one, the 15 staccato lines, is going to be much more readable, much more well received. Basically, it's that people don't like giant blocks of text. And especially when it's blog form. It's one thing if you're
Hmm.
reading, Lord of the Rings, and
Sure.
it's text on a page and it's paragraphs on the page. But when it comes to kind of this blogging medium, that's just like a weird little inside baseball thing that stuck out to me. Um, but one thing that I think of more in general on just like where do the ideas come from, and what do I want to write about, and how do I connect with the readers and the listeners, is to truly, I've tried to create this flywheel in both the blog and the podcast where my audience truly understands and truly believes that they can reach out to me by email, they
Hmm.
can write me a question, and that their question, I'm either going to answer it directly in the email, or just as likely, I'm going to turn their question into a blog post or answer their question on an AMA episode of the podcast. And then it's this kind of, like I said, it's a flywheel. It accelerates over time because, well, guess what? If you had this question, Chris, that was burning at you enough to reach out to me and ask, odds
Hmm.
are you're not the only one. And other people on a similar path either have the same question, or maybe that question never crossed their mind and they're like, oh, I should be thinking about this question. And not
Right.
only here's this question I should be thinking about, but now here's Jesse providing the answer. So next thing you know, a lot of my content is truly audience generated. It's from their questions. And as long as I feel like their question is truly something that's applicable to many retirees, it doesn't have to be applicable to everybody, but I know that some subset of my audience is really going to cling on to that. And that's, I would say at this point, the majority of my ideas are audience generated. And then as the audience sees, like, oh, Jesse's actually writing articles and creating podcasts about the questions we ask, I'm going to send him a question now. And it just kind of builds this loyal tribe of listeners and readers. It makes my life easier on the content create. It's like everybody wins. It's the rising tide that lifts all ships.
Right. I love that. I love that. I know I've done that a handful of time on my blog too, where I'll have a post about something and then a conversation starts like on Facebook, and someone will have like either a counter argument or something like that, or bring something up that I'm like, oh, I didn't like, let me research that. I had no idea. And so I'll like research that and then do like another blog post that references back to, last week I talked about this. Well, now this is what it is. So yeah, I love it and that was one thing that I was really trying to, again, I'm relatively new to the podcasting and the blogging world, and especially now with social media, trying to get everything out there on, again, my kids will love it when I call it the TikTok. No, trying to get stuff out there on social. And one of the things that I was really fighting myself about, well, what is my definition of success? How do I know I'm successful? And one of the, I guess one of the ways I could gauge my success is if every time I post something, whether a new blog article or a new podcast episode, I start a conversation, that's a win. Like cool. If I have like just two people talking about something, for me, that's a win. So yeah. I love to use that content, like you said, back into creating new content.
Yeah, I like that too. I think you're striking on something there. Like it's something I spoke about in Portland, going back to FinCon, is this idea that none of us, and if you're listening out there and fine, you're not a content creator, but maybe you run your local Rotary organization, or maybe you're on the school board or something like that. Like, we don't need to go viral. We don't need to be celebrities, but in our own little way, if we're kind of making these small impacts and we have this small group of people who listen and learn from us, and or the small group of people who benefit from our work, like that, to me, I mean, not to get all philosophical, but like, that's what being a community member and a member of productive society, like that's kind of what it's all about. And so, yeah, if you can do something little to start that conversation or to teach that lesson to a small group of people, to have a small following behind you who enjoys learning from you, like that's the name of the game.
Yeah, that's awesome. If I have just one person reach out to me, I mean, believe it or not, I mean, crazy. I'm in this little garage band and we had a gig that we played on Saturday, and it was a small gig, but we had a friend, I would say he's a friend. It's an acquaintance. I've known him for years, but he showed up at the gig and he was there, and we kind of, in between sets, we had a break. And so we were just catching up, and he's like, how are things going? Blah, blah, blah. And he goes, yeah, I want to maybe reach out to you and have a conversation, because he wants to make sure that he's on the right path to when he could retire. And I'm like, dude, anytime. Like, that right there was validation enough. Like, I don't have all the answers and I'm not an expert. I can share you my experience and I could point you to people like you. But that was validation to say, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
It's one of my friends told me a few years ago, and it stuck with me. He goes, Jesse, it's hard to see the picture when you're standing inside the frame.
Oh,
and because at the time I was literally telling him, I was like, I don't know what the future of this project is. Like, I still enjoy writing. I'm not sure I'm enjoying podcasting. This is at that time. And I don't know what the future is. Sometimes it feels like I'm just screaming into the void. Right. And yes, the project has matured over the years and it's grown, but now I feel like it's stalled. And he's like, Jess, it's hard to see the picture if you're inside the frame. I'm not in the frame. I'm outside the frame as one of your fans, as one of your listeners. And he's like, let me tell you, there are a lot of people out there who are paying attention, but doing so silently. And, if you met them in person, they'd shake your hand and say, you're doing an awesome job. And I come and listen to you, but they're kind of a silent listener and a silent beneficiary. And, I'm glad I stuck with it. I'm glad he told me that, because I think there's a truth to that. I mean, it sounds like your friend here, your acquaintance, was like, you might have never known he was really that paying attention or that big of a fan. And next thing you know, boom, he's saying, I trust you enough to come and ask you for advice.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of that, or a lot of our efforts in the world. It's not that they're unnoticed, but maybe it's just they're not like openly recognized.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that no one's paying attention, that no one's benefiting, though.
Yeah. I mean, every now and then, I do a weekly newsletter every
Mm-hmm.
Friday, and every now and then one of my subscribers will reply to that and say, "Hey, this was awesome." That's it. That's all they said. I'm like,
Yep.
dude, if one person replied to that newsletter, that made it worth it, right?
100%.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I want to shift gears a little bit because there's something that I know you're part of, and as one that also is working in the nonprofit area, I know that you. I think it's just super rad. So you joined a board of, it's like the Humane Society for the Greater Rochester area. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess one of the first questions I have is, how has this nonprofit board work that you're doing taught you about like values aligned giving, planning, philanthropy with like your clients, for example, or just share a little bit about what you've learned in that role and how it relates to working with your clients.
Yeah. Oh man, thanks for giving me the opportunity. So
Yeah.
you're right. I joined the board. To make a long story short, back when COVID happened, my wife and I started fostering dogs, and I was never a huge dog person. But next thing you know, we brought in a couple dozen dogs into our home over the course of
Wow.
4 years, and adopted one ourselves. And I became a full-fledged dog person. And in terms of giving back, you're right. I volunteered to join the board of it's called Lollipop Farm, and that's
Okay.
an old name, but it's the Humane Society of Greater Rochester. It's a really amazing organization. If you're in Greater Rochester, please come out for a visit. But anyway, Rochester, New York, that is, not
Yep.
Rochester, Minnesota. I know, here we are, heavy metal money.
That's
Uh,
right.
uh, um, but yes, that's a really interesting question, because we do get some pretty serious donations. We do get some pretty serious bequests, which that has to do with estate planning. And something that I've kind of been doing with our development officers, or the people who work in fundraising, essentially, is
Mhm.
just letting them know, like, hey, when you're having conversations with retirees, or you're just having conversations in general with people who maybe are, thinking about, well, I've got this appreciated stock, and if I make donations, isn't there a tax benefit to that? And the answer is like, wow, there are some pretty interesting, unique, and nuanced things that people can do if they want to be philanthropic, but also, sure, they want to get a little bit of a cherry on top when it comes to their financial plan. And maybe that has to do with donating appreciating stock, which is really a twofer,
Mhm.
because the nonprofit organization gets the full benefit of your donation. There's no capital gains that the nonprofit has to pay. You've just been able to get that stock off of your balance sheet without having to pay the capital gains yourself. And that size of your donation, let's say you donate $10,000 of appreciated stock, well, you just got a $10,000 deduction on this year's taxes. So it's like, whoa, everybody kind of wins there.
Yeah.
Um, or just, I mean, bequests and maybe some trusts when it comes to estate planning are another interesting one, where if you have concerns that, you know what, I don't want to give away too much money quite yet, because I might need to spend it before I die. I don't know how long I'm going to live, and
Mhm.
longevity is a risk I'm not really willing to toy with right now. Well, listen, there are plenty of ways that you can structure something in your estate plan to leave money after you pass away, or to provide income to you while you're alive, and then leave the remainder to a charity after you pass away, or something like that. But so it has been really interesting to learn more about the overlap between financial planning and philanthropy, because it's a wonderful thing. And as we hear these stories, I had a conversation with a local Choose FI listener, who's a very philanthropic guy. And I encouraged him, because this is something near and dear to his heart. He said,
Mhm.
I think the FI movement has a bit of a philanthropy issue, because we're all so frugal, and we're all so, for lack of a term, money conscious, that there are some people out there who they're living off of the 2.5% rule. They're staying up at night worried they'll run out of money, And it's like, you know what? They ought to be cutting a multi-$1,000 a check year to their charity of choice. And I say they ought to be. It's their money. They can do what they want.
Mhm.
But his point was there are a lot of people in the FI movement who could be giving more back. And the cool thing is there are some pretty tax efficient ways to doing so if you so choose.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that leads me to a plug. I just want to plug yield and spread, if you're familiar with that. So basically, this is a way that, again, it's kind of geared more towards, again, the FI community, a way that you make this pledge to donate to a cause that is important to you. And not that it like keeps you accountable, but it's just something that, like you said, there is kind of a gap there. And I think we can all do, we can all do more. For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then granted, maybe the gap is something that's in my head and maybe in actuality, people are giving more than I think, but just some of the stories you hear out there, it seems like there's a lot of us, if we're here listening, if we feel like we've reached FI, we have some pretty amazing circumstances in our life.
Mhm.
And then to at least consider taking, take your 4% rule and take 1/10 of 1% and try to give it back.
Yeah.
That's giving away 2.5% of your spending every year.
Sure.
It's not a bad place to start. And I think some people would argue you can dial that even further up.
Well, and even that, just where you start, can make a dramatic difference in someone else's life. So it's
Correct.
it's pretty rad. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, I mean, I think it's great that. So tell me about the dog that you adopted. Who is this? Who is this dog?
So there's a great story about her because she came to us severely underweight and, with some pretty obvious signs that she'd recently been nursing. And within the first 24 hours of us having her, we got a call from the adoption or the foster agency saying, hey, that dog, Mama, she did come to Rochester with puppies in tow.
Oh, wow.
We thought the puppies were all old enough to no longer be with her, but we've changed our mind. They need to still be nursing. So if you don't mind, we're going to take Mama back and we'll get you another dog. And my wife took that phone call, and unbeknownst to me, my wife said, actually, no, we'll just take the puppies. So within 24 hours of our first foster experience, we had a Mama and we had 3 puppies running around our house, but it was great. And Mama ate a lot. She ate so much food because she was a starving, malnourished nursing dog. She was in some rough shape. And the puppies were fine. Puppies were healthy. The puppies all found good homes. And we quickly learned that Mama's name wasn't actually Mama. My wife went through, she literally sat there with a list of like top 100 dog names for female dogs. I went through the list. And when she said Sadie, the dog's ears perked up. And then my wife waited a minute and she tried Sadie again, and the dog's ears perked up. So whether her name was Sadie or Maisie or something like that,
right.
We went with Sadie, and that's her name today. And
Right
we've had her for 5.5 years now, and she's a Australian cattle dog. She's living a much better life than she was when she was a homeless mama on the streets of Houston. So
wow, I love that. That's a great story. Great story. Whether they're just starting their journey, whether they're on their way, maybe they're discouraged, they don't know if they're ever going to retire, whatever it is, what's one takeaway you want to leave with the listeners today?
I'm balancing between 2, Chris. And
yeah,
but I think the one, I mean, again, not to, it's tough because I think people want there to be a magic pill. And some people want there to be a magic pill. They want the super secret information that they haven't heard before. But I'm telling you guys that, I work with a team there are 8 CFPs here at work. We do financial planning is the foundation of the work we do. And that foundation of financial planning is knowing the money that's coming in and out of your life on a monthly or quarterly basis. If you don't know that, there's nothing that any expert in the world can do for you that'll be precise enough to help you sleep at night. You need to know the money that's coming in and the money that's going out. So it sounds simple, and it is simple, but if you're not doing it, you're missing out on a foundational aspect of your financial plan.
I love it. That's great. And I guess before we go, where can people get to know more about you and everything that you do, and listen to your podcast and read your blog? Let people know where they can find you.
Sure. So assuming you're a podcast listener out there, my podcast is available on every single podcast player that I'm aware of, and it's called personal finance for long-term investors. But if you just happen to be stopping by just once and you're not really a regular podcast listener, I would suggest then you go sign up for my newsletter. Bestinterest.blog is the website, and you can sign up there right on the homepage. I send a weekly newsletter that has not only my new content, but also some top links that I find around the internet. And that's my kind of weekly cadence of staying in touch with my audience.
Awesome. I love it. Well, I'm going to say, Jesse, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone else for listening, following along. Please like, subscribe, share wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And we'll catch you next time on the Extreme Personal Finance Show.